Hello friends, for today's video we're going to be looking at some fall book recommendations. We are going to go through a variety of different kinds of books, and I am going to break them down by category, and that way if there's one particular kind of thing that you think of or that you're craving for the fall season, then you can easily jump ahead to any of those specific things. One of the categories is going to be monsters and demons. We also have one that is more fairy tale, or at the very least it has settings that often bring to mind things that we associate with the fall season. And then last, we have some kind of mystery component. I do want to be clear that for the mystery ones, my area of expertise is not mystery and thriller books. So if you have any mystery thriller recommendations, I personally actually would love to know your recommendations for those. That's less what I'm looking at. I'm more looking at historical fiction and fantasy that has mystery components to it that I think are really fun for the fall. I did also do an entire video dedicated to witchy books, so if you are looking for that kind of story, I'll have that video linked. And then coming up, I am going to have a separate video where I talk about adult fantasy books that I feel like are perfect for this season. There are some books that still fall under the umbrella today of adult fantasy. It's just that they fit within the subgenres of cozy fantasy, or they are fantasy romance and romantically leaning. So when I do the one for adult fantasy, it's truly just fantasy as opposed to these other subgenres and sister genres of fantasy. Besides just cozy romantasy and fantasy romance, we are going to also be looking at some young adult books, and as stated, there's going to be a little bit of historical fiction mixed in, so it really is going to be a big variety. I do want to know though, besides just potential mystery thriller books, what are some of your recommendations for the fall season? No worries if it ends up being something that I mention or if it's something that I've mentioned in the past. Just let me know what your quintessential fall book recommendations are, or if you have a book that you continuously come back to. I would love to know what your books are. All that said, jumping into it, we're going to kick it off with demons and monsters. Jumping into it, first up, we have The Floating World. One of our characters in this story is a traveling storyteller, and then the other character is somebody who has lost a great deal of his memories, but the one thing that he's able to hold to that he does still recall are memories of his brother, and he's willing to basically do anything to be reunited with him. Our other perspective, the storyteller, is somebody who cares very deeply for her family, who she travels alongside. And after a demon attacks them and they are harmed, she ends up using this magic to protect them, but this magic is not something she should have. And there are remnants of it that are seen by other people in the population, and now they are trying to come after her. And our character, who is willing to do anything to be reunited with his brother, ends up being tasked with trying to find this person and bring them in. So you can see where they're at some point on opposing sides, but you also care about both of these characters, and you want them to, if they do cross paths, to be able to be open with each other, because you're like, oh, I care about both of them. I understand why both of them are doing what they're doing, but maybe they could work together. I hope they work together, but you also don't know, is this going to be where they're actually enemies? Are they going to come together, and are they going to unite to go against some greater force? But also, if that happens, then what about the character who wants to be reunited with his brother? And then also, what about these demons that are present? And it does seem like maybe our character who has lost his memories has some kind of connection to these demonic beings, but he doesn't really know why or how, and he can't remember. Continuing with demons, next up we have the Shadow of the Fox trilogy. I feel like at surface level, it actually kind of sounds similar to The Floating World, but they read very, very differently. They are both young adult fantasy works, but I think that The Floating World has more of a prettiness to it, whereas this feels more like an anime in book form, which of course anime can be pretty as well, but there's something about the other one that just feels very lush and gorgeous, and this one has this kind of grittiness to it. The demons are very much rooted in Japanese folklore. The setup for this story is that you have this young girl named Yumeko who is tasked with trying to protect a piece of this scroll. And if the pieces of the scroll are all brought together, specifically on the night of the dragon, then this very, very powerful being, this dragon, will grant the person who unites these pieces together a wish. And this is very, very dangerous, as oftentimes people use this wish to gain for themselves. They use it selfishly, and it negatively impacts a lot of the rest of the world. But it also means that there are a lot of people after the pieces of the scroll as the night of the dragon is coming. So Yumeko is finding herself trying to take the scroll somewhere where it can be protected. And there is another individual who is sent to find pieces of the scroll by a shadow clan, and this character's name is Tatsumi. And when Tatsumi finds Yumeko, she tricks him into believing that she knows where a piece of the scroll is. She just needs protection to get there. all the while knowing that if he finds out that she actually has this piece of a scroll that he is after, her life could be in danger. So you can see the way that this and the Floating World feels similar, because it feels like, okay, so we were expecting these characters to cross paths, and it kind of feels like this one that has associations with this some kind of shadowy group, or this group that has something to do with demons. It seems like there's that character after this character, and then this character maybe knows something that they're keeping, and there's like these secrets that they're keeping, and it's somewhat a traveling tale in a sense, but truly they read very, very differently from each other. And this trilogy in particular, there are so many pieces within it that you almost can't really fully appreciate till you get to the end, which is always really fun with any kind of completed series, to be able to look back and realize that there are things that were right there in front of you the whole time and you just never really knew. So it does make rereading also really fun. 2 additional demon-related books. We have Clockwork Angel, as well as The Scorpion and the Night Blossom. Clockwork Angel I probably don't need to say too much about, because if anything, I'm really late to the game and most people already are very familiar with this series. But maybe this might remind you, like, oh, if you've read it before, you might want to give it a reread, or if you've never read it before, then maybe you could give it a try. I actually picked up the first book for the first time this year, and I can absolutely see why so many people enjoy it, as it just moves really consistently, not just with the plot of these shadow hunters, these people that are after these demons, but also there's always intrigue with the characters. So our main character, you really feel for her right away. The stakes are very, very high for her personally, but also she ends up being entrenched in the goings on of the shadow hunters. So you're fearful for her. You don't really know how she's going to find her place within this group, but then the members of this group, they all have their own secrets, and you're consistently wondering what is going on with them. So it's absolutely very much a page turner. It does kind of speak back to a certain time in YA fantasy that I actually kind of miss, and it feels like a return to that. Not in that it is a return, literally, because it was written at that time. I mean, when you read it, it feels like, oh yeah, I'm coming back to what fantasy was like at that time, and it just feels nostalgic as a result. And a lot of the different kinds of beings that the characters interact with, because even though they are hunting demons, there are other kinds of beings that show up, and as a result, I do feel like it fits really, really perfectly, not just the fall season, but I would say specifically October reads. The Scorpion and the Night Blossom is a newer release from this year, and the dedication that the author made for this is to all the C-drama girlies, which I think is a perfect way to describe what this book feels like, because it's very over the top, it's very dramatic, and the setup is that you follow this young woman who, after demons attacked her and her family, it left her essentially responsible and having to take on this parental role at far too young of an age. Her younger sister, she's been protective of her. Her father passed away, and her mother is now in this comatose state that she wants to try and help her out of. And the only way that she really sees as an option for doing that is to try and enter into these immortality trials, as the winner of those trials will gain this pill of immortality, and she wants to use that to heal her mother. However, as she is traversing the landscape to try and get to this place, she crosses paths with this very mysterious person, and they seem far too capable, and she's very unsure about them. And as the story progresses, you find out more secrets about that character. She is consistently on her toes, but also finds she can't help but be drawn to them, and they seem particularly interested in her predicament as well, and you are questioning why. I think this book is one that feels very, very on trend with a lot of what we see in fantasy romance, but I also think that the author did something kind of sneaky, where she took a lot of what's very familiar and she kind of lulled you into this false sense of security, in a sense, and then allowed for her to do interesting and unique things later by playing off of a blueprint that we see so often in fantasy romance. So I think it both is going to be really appealing to people who like a lot of what's on trend in fantasy romance, but also it does enough things that are subverting expectations towards the latter half, or maybe even the latter quarter, that I think it's going to surprise some readers. Another new release from this year, we have the Nightblood Prince. A quick heads up, if you don't know, I recommend books even if they didn't necessarily work for me, as I do think obviously we all have very, very different tastes, and I always want to ensure that people find exactly what they're looking for. And the Nightblood Prince didn't quite work for me, but I definitely think it's going to work for a lot of other people. The setup for the story is that you have this young woman who has a path in her life set aside for her that would be very comfortable and very secure. However, it would also rob her of pretty much all of her agency and her freedom to live life as she wants it. And so she decides to go against this secure path, this sure path, in order to set out on her own and live her own life. And at first, she's very proud of herself for this, and she's not displeased with this decision until she starts seeing the ways that it negatively impacts her family. And this especially comes to the forefront when it doesn't seem like just her family is negatively impacted, but also it seems like her nation is going to go at war, which of course is going to have a huge impact on so many more people. And so she's trying to consistently find this balance between living her life the way she wants to, but also sacrificing for the greater good. And she's finding herself specifically in the middle of the two forces that are going up against each other. And so there is a lot of political intrigue, there are a fair amount of action scenes, and there's a lot of getting to see both sides of the story. I don't want to say too much about how the monster component plays a role. It does have to do with one of the kinds of people that you see in the military of one of the forces, but I don't want to elaborate too much, as if you have managed to not see too much about it, I don't want to give that reveal. But I do find that I haven't really seen this particular kind of monster utilized in this way before. So I did feel like that was kind of a fun mix into the story. And then last, for the monsters and demons category, we have In the Veins of the Drowning. The story follows a young woman named Imogen, who is a siren who is actually hiding her siren side from all of the humans around her. She is essentially kept relatively imprisoned, although she's kept in what I'll call a pretty cage, as the king of this land has always kept her around, and she lives in somewhat of a state of luxury, but she is very much trapped, and he intends to marry her off to one of the siren hunters, but she realizes that this is probably going to be a very dangerous path for her. Even though initially she was open to just keeping this side of herself a secret if it meant she could maintain some level of security in her life, at some point that's not quite as much of an option, and she ends up going on the run, and in order to escape, she ends up finding herself allying with a king from a foreign land who does not get along with the king who was keeping her contained. And so now they're fearful of the wrath of that king coming after them. This other individual also has his reasons for helping her, and he has his own things that are going on politically back in his kingdom. And you see the way that these two characters come together both to help each other, but also seem like they are consistently getting in each other's way. And one of the things that nobody seems to be fully aware of or know what to do about is that while yes, there are sirens that exist within the sea, there also seems to be undead within the sea as well. And nobody's really sure where they came from or how to fight back against them, but they are proving to be a significant threat. Now switching to fairy tale books, or books that have settings that bring to mind the fall season. And first up we have The 13th Child. So this one is very much fitting within the fairy tale feel, as you follow this young girl whose foster father is Death himself. She is one of 13 children, and she is specifically the 13th child. Her entire life is just basically the scraps that are left over from the rest of her family, and she doesn't have a very fulfilling existence. They live in poverty as a result of there just being so many of them. She is finding that she probably is not ever going to have enough to eat. She's never going to have really any kind of comfortable life, but when her foster father, Death, ends up taking her under his wing, she sees this as an opportunity to have a slightly better life for herself. However, Death personified, just because he is personified does not mean he acts or completely understands what it is like to be a human, especially when it comes to time itself. And so she's finding herself oftentimes in isolation. She's given tasks and just expected to dive fully into these tasks for years at a time. And she comes away from her experiences being raised by Death, both caring for him, but also having this very strained relationship with him. But also she has the ability now to help people in the way of healing. And Death has given her this other ability that allows for her to see when people are going to die. And this especially becomes a problem when one day the mark shows upon a noble person that she is treating. Where The 13th Child was a standalone, next up we have a completed series, and that would be the Emily Wilde series. The first book specifically is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, and I'm sure you've heard the setup, but just in case you haven't, the idea is that you follow this young woman named Emily Wilde who is in academia, and she is specifically studying the Fae, and this does often lead her to going on site, trying to hear from the locals, find out about their culture, their customs, and their stories, and from that she tries to figure out everything that has any kind of association with the Fae of that area. She documents it, and then she tries to see if she can actually find the Fae. And she does this throughout the course of the series, and alongside her, she has her annoying but endearing coworker named Wendell Bamblebee, who is a little bit of a slacker, but he's also very charming, and he seems to always have a little bit more information than he should. And it's a very cheeky story, it's very fun, and I also just really enjoyed that kind of historical fiction feeling to this, the way that everything is described, and following her in general, following a character that's just so invested in her studies was a lot of fun, and it just screams, in my opinion, the fall season, especially because the way that the Fae are portrayed in this is much more rooted in folklore. Next up, I'm just going to kind of blanket statement say Sarah Beth Durst, as this author has written a number of works, and a fair amount of them fit the fall season. The Queens of Renthia is somewhat of a fast-paced, cutthroat story that has a very intense forest setting, so if that brings to mind the fall season, there's that. We also have the Spellshop, which is very, very cozy, but still has a good amount of depth. The Enchanted Greenhouse takes place in the same world as the Spellshop, and the Enchanted Greenhouse for me, actually I found was almost so cute that it leaned into like cotton candy cute territory, where it was sweet, but also maybe I preferred a little bit more of the Spellshop because of the additional depth that I thought it had. But of course, different things speak to different people, and maybe you'll really, really resonate with what happens in the Enchanted Greenhouse and the characters within this. But in general, the Enchanted Greenhouse is the one that I was thinking of for today, as it does have this really beautiful, lovely plant life that is showcased within it. And for me, that just always brings to mind the fall season. I actually could see this being a good one for springtime too, though, but I do find that because it has this coziness to it, it makes me think of the fall season and getting all curled up with a blanket and reading a book. But regardless, you follow this young woman who was punished for using magic she wasn't supposed to. Her punishment was to be turned into a statue, and then one day she finds herself being unpetrified from the statue. She's in the middle of nowhere. There are magical greenhouses basically all over the place, and there is only one other person around, and he is responsible for taking care of all of the greenhouses all by himself. And not knowing what's going on, what has transpired since she was petrified, she decides to assist him. They become friends, but also it becomes very clear very quickly that the greenhouses need far more than just the two of them in order to survive. And a lot of the plants have this level of sentience to them as well. So there's almost a level of animal companion in a sense, even though they're plants. And they are quite cute. I personally, when I read this, I thought it would make for a really, really beautiful, lovely Pixar film, because it would just be colorful and vibrant and silly. And that's honestly what I think those words capture quite well what the Enchanted Greenhouse is. It's just lovely, vibrant, and silly. Last for this category, we have The Night and the Moth. Once again, this wasn't exactly my cup of tea, but obviously it is really working for a lot of people. And I think the thing that this author has done in her writing that a lot of people absolutely adore is having this kind of gothic feel. There's like a darkness to it without ever feeling like it's leaning into grimdark or gritty, but there is like this romanticized gothic feel in a lot of it. And that does create for really good aesthetic and environment. The setup for this story is that you follow this young woman who, from a young age, has dedicated her life to being a priestess. Specifically, she finds that she is consistently having to drown herself in order to bring about certain visions that she then relays to individuals who come to seek this information. And she is meant to not even really have a sense of self, so much so that she is not named, she is just given a number. But someday she will leave this place, and she is just about at the end of her service, and so she's ready to explore the world and know the world a little bit better, but some of her fellow priestesses start going missing, and then that sets her down a very different path that reveals a little bit more about this religious area that she's dedicated herself to, and also all of the magic and the history behind that. Now getting into the mystery category, and first up we have the Apothecary Diaries. And the setup for this is that you follow this young girl named Mau Mau who has been captured and sold into servitude, specifically within this rear palace, which is where the emperor and his concubines live. Mau Mau is very, very aware that she is somebody who does not have a level of prestige or status, so she just wants to keep her head down and not get involved in anything. get through her amount of years that her contract has, and then go back to living her life as the daughter of an apothecary. And also you could say she's an apothecary herself, so she just wants to return to that. But because she is so naturally curious and because she does have a strong sense of justice, she ends up finding herself constantly in the middle of a lot of the mysteries that are going on within the rear palace. And because of the way that the concubines oftentimes have people trying to poison them, and you don't know who's trying to poison them, and you don't know if it's other concubines, if it's someone from the outside, if it's from within. There are a lot of mysteries, and Mao Mao, being as brilliant as she is and also having a familiarity with poisons, is often the person who is trying to solve these mysteries. And alongside her are a collection of other characters within the rear palace. And you also get so much intrigue throughout this story with not just the inner palace, but then eventually you get things on the outside, and you're seeing the ways that everything kind of comes together. Everything's connected. The events of the past and previous emperors trickle down into affecting a lot of the people that are alive today. There's just so much to the story. There's so much to sink your teeth into. It's also exceptionally funny. A quick heads up, if you do decide to give Apothecary Diaries a try, you've likely heard of there being an anime and a manga. The light novels are the source material, and also it's a translated work, so that's going to be a little bit different. It's also in the light novels format, which is a little different from a lot of Western storytelling, so just maybe keep that in mind if you give it a try. But there aren't too many things that I have found I love more this year and then diving into the Apothecary Diaries light novels. They're fantastic, so much fun, and the mystery component truly is a lot of fun as well. Next up we have Jackaby. I could have easily fit this into the monsters and demons category, as pretty much anything you can think of, whether it be something to do with fae, whether it has to do with vampires and werewolves, whatever kinds of creatures that you can think of. The idea is that pretty much all of them exist. It's just the average everyday person doesn't necessarily know it. And sometimes when murders occur, there are indications to people with insight that it probably wasn't a human that was responsible. It was probably some kind of creature. And this is where Jackaby comes into the picture, as well as our main perspective. Our main perspective is somebody who is setting out into the world on their own for the first time, and they're just looking to try to get a job, and they basically decide to become the protege to this detective. Last for today, we have Belladonna. This one also has feelings of almost like a grim fairy tale to it, but I definitely think the mystery component really stood out in this first book in particular to me, as our main character is somebody who has been somewhat ostracized from society because of the fact that people around her always seem to die. The people that are her guardians, something bad always happens to them. And she herself, there are pieces of her behavior and how she seems to act around other people that it just doesn't seem quite right to everyone else. However, she also is somebody who's been left with a lot of money. So even though people don't really care for her because they're afraid of her, they also are not afraid of her fortune. And so she's always somewhat still kept in the loop with this sort of Regency era way of people acting, but she never really feels like she belongs. And she finds herself now in association with this one branch of her family, and it seems like a lot of really weird things are transpiring with them because the mother has recently died, the father is grieving, he's getting lost in these lavish parties, and he doesn't seem like he's necessarily fulfilling his role as father. The son of the family is somebody who seems bent on getting justice, and he's trying to keep everything together and keep their reputation in a way that is respectable. And then the sister, the younger daughter, ends up being very, very ill. And our main character, when she comes into the picture, she is welcomed into the home, but then it would seem that the ghost of the dead wife/mother has told her that somebody killed her. And our character does have some abilities to talk to death personified, so somewhat similar to the 13th Child in that sense. And Death Personified is kind of allying with her to solve the mystery of this family, but also maybe gain a little bit more information into if she is cursed in some fashion. And the first book in particular was my favorite of the trilogy, although the trilogy does something interesting in that the first book is focused on this character, this second installment has this character and another one that are both kind of equally the main perspectives, and the third book is following the other person that became a perspective in the second. So it does kind of shift around to tell this complete story that involves different characters, but I found I was more fully engrossed the most, I would say, in that first installment. As noted at the beginning, if you have any of your own recommendations, feel free to leave those. And if you're interested in any of these, I'll have them linked in the description bar. Thanks so much for watching, though. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.